Tom Bower destroys Meghan Markle after new evidence exposes her lies. Titles will be stripped on 1st of January. What if one of the most iconic royal interviews of the modern age, watched by millions, dissected across continents, was built on deliberate fabrication? What if the real story of Meghan Markle's departure from royal life isn't the sanitized Netflix narrative, but something much darker? And what if Tom Bower, the journalist who's made a career out of exposing the hidden truths behind power and privilege, has finally uncovered the piece of evidence that rips the whole thing wide open? Because that's exactly what's happened. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the timing couldn't be more damning. We are just weeks away from January 1st, the date now whispered inside palace corridors as the cutoff. The day Buckingham Palace may formally strip Meghan and Harry of their royal titles. Not just a symbolic move, not just a slap on the wrist. This would be an unprecedented repudiation, a constitutional and personal disavowal of the couple once hailed as the monarchy's modern face. And at the center of this storm, a secret internal palace report. A classified document never meant to see the light of day, now reportedly in the hands of Tom Bower, and quietly circulated among senior aides, high-level courtiers, and yes, King Charles himself. So what's inside this report? And why is it triggering the royal family's most aggressive internal reckoning in decades? Let's dig in. Because once you understand the magnitude of this bombshell, you'll never look at Meghan Markle or the monarchy the same way again. The calm before the media hurricane. In the days leading up to this explosive reveal, the public remained largely unaware that anything seismic was brewing. On the surface, things looked deceptively calm. Meghan had been relatively quiet. No new Netflix specials, no high-profile interviews, no cover stories in Vogue or Variety. The Archetypes podcast had gone cold after its Spotify fallout. And even Harry, usually the more visible half of the duo, had retreated from the press circuit after his memoir Spare ran its course. But behind palace gates, a war was unfolding. Silently, strategically. According to high-level sources, King Charles had quietly authorized a task force of legal, communications, and archival aides to conduct a comprehensive review of all public claims made by Meghan and Harry since their exit in 2020. That included interviews, books, podcasts, docuseries, speeches, and most controversially, private claims that later found their way into public discourse. The goal? Not to launch a smear campaign. The goal was damage control, institutional preservation. A monarchy now rebranded under Charles III could not afford the growing perception that it had tolerated deception for the sake of family unity, especially not with public trust eroding and support for republicanism, especially among younger generations, inching upward in the polls. So the task force went to work, quietly, for months. And then came the leak. Enter Tom Bower, the Crown's reluctant truth-teller. If you've followed British journalism, you know Tom Bower doesn't deal in fluff. He's not a gossip columnist. He's not a royalist sycophant. He's not part of the institution's PR machinery. He's a bulldog, relentless, fact-obsessed, polarizing, and widely feared by his subjects. His unauthorized biographies of figures like Prince Charles, Simon Cowell, and Boris Johnson have exposed everything from corrupt dealings to backroom betrayals. So when word began circulating that Bower had somehow obtained a confidential internal palace report detailing Meghan's misrepresentations, the reaction among royal insiders was not relief, it was dread. Because when Bower gets involved, the veneer comes off. The protective layer of titles, gestures, and palace statements gives way to the naked mechanics of power and manipulation. And now, according to multiple sources, he's got the receipts, the evidence, buried memos, deleted messages, and contradictions. Here's where things start to shift from rumor to revelation. The report Bower has allegedly obtained isn't just a general critique or a subjective opinion. It's described as a line-by-line, cross-referenced examination of specific claims Meghan Markle has made and the documented evidence that contradicts them. One senior aide, quoted anonymously, called it a factual reckoning, a cold, hard mirror held up to a carefully curated narrative. Some examples of what's reportedly inside: correspondence between Meghan and palace staff regarding a private letter from King Charles, used, allegedly out of context, in her Oprah interview. A detailed breakdown of the infamous Kate made me cry incident, including emails and texts suggesting the story was, in fact, the opposite. Internal records of staff complaints during Meghan's time as a working royal, some of which were suppressed out of fear of optics. Time-stamped memos from Queen Elizabeth II's aides contradicting Meghan's version of their final conversations. Evidence that some of Meghan's first-person anecdotes during the Netflix docuseries were altered or fictionalized for dramatic impact. And most explosively, a revelation that Meghan may have been briefed to tell her story in a way that would generate maximum sympathy, even if that meant distorting timelines and omitting crucial context. The phrase used repeatedly in the document, according to Bauer, misleading by design. The fallout. Inside the palace's breaking point. So why now? Why wait until now to act on all this? Why not respond immediately after Oprah? Or after Spare? Or after Netflix? Because, according to insiders, Charles was desperately trying to avoid this moment. He hoped, perhaps naively, that the rift could be healed. That time, public fatigue, and the Queen's death would bring a reset. That his coronation might provide a symbolic reconciliation. But that hope has eroded. Fast. In recent months, Meghan's team had reportedly begun scouting new media partnerships, including a rumored documentary deal focused on female empowerment in leadership. And insiders feared, with justification, that the royal family would again be used as a narrative foil. In other words, the cycle was set to repeat. And this time, Charles wasn't willing to be the punching bag. So the January 1st date was quietly floated. First as a hypothetical, then as a contingency, and now as a near certainty. A clean break. Titles removed. Styles revoked. No more Duke and Duchess. No more half-in, half-out royal branding. Just done. But before any of that could happen publicly, the palace needed a final justification. Not just a moral argument. A legal one. A constitutional one. And that's where the report comes in. The public turns, slowly, then all at once. It's hard to overstate just how much public perception has shifted since 2020. When Meghan and Harry first stepped back, the narrative was one of liberation. A young couple fleeing institutional rigidity, escaping racism, escaping press cruelty, seeking peace. But over time, and especially after the Netflix series and Spare, the public began to question the one-sidedness of that story. Was it really about safety and sanity? Or was it about control? Were Meghan and Harry victims of palace cruelty? Or architects of their own tabloid stardom? And now, with Bauer's upcoming publication promising to present evidence never before made public, the tide is poised to turn even more dramatically. The public doesn't like to be lied to. And if Bauer can prove that key scenes, moments that generated global sympathy, were manipulated, that sense of betrayal may run deep. Especially in the UK, especially among the monarchy's traditional base, and especially in light of the Queen's recent passing, with many seeing the attacks on the institution as attacks on her legacy. Why this story matters now? Some may say, what's the point? Meghan and Harry are gone. They've moved on. Let them live. But here's the thing. They didn't just leave. They monetized their exit. They turned a family feud into a billion-dollar brand, using their royal association while simultaneously denouncing it. And if the palace has finally found evidence that parts of that narrative were knowingly false, then we are no longer dealing with a story about emotional wounds or cultural missteps. We are looking at potential reputational fraud on a global scale, with political, financial, and constitutional consequences. This isn't just about two people and their titles. It's about truth, and whether institutions, royal or otherwise, still have the will to defend it. A final tease, what's coming next? In the next chapter, we'll walk through how exactly Tom Bauer got his hands on the secret report, who leaked it, why now, and what explosive detail made even hardened royal aides call it the smoking gun. You'll hear about emails they hoped were deleted, messages they hoped would never be recovered, and a single phrase written by Meghan herself that may change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do? If you uncovered a file that proved everything you once believed was a carefully managed illusion, that's exactly what happened to Tom Bauer. Because buried in the bowels of the palace, behind locked drawers, redacted memos, and India-bound silence, was a dossier. Not a diary, not a gossip note, but a methodically compiled, internally vetted, confidential palace report. And this wasn't some loose folder sitting on a desk. No, this was intelligence warfare in velvet gloves. A master file compiled over 2 years. Dozens of contributors. Cross-referenced emails. Voice notes. Private journal entries from royal aides. Communications logs. Archive footage timestamps. Even transcripts from unaired interviews. It was never meant to be seen by the public. And yet, somehow, Tom Bower got it. The leak that shook the crown. It started, as most palace bombshells do, with a whisper. A late-night phone call. A meeting in a Kensington parking garage. A flash drive slid across a cafe table, accompanied by 4 words that would freeze any journalist's blood. It's all in here. What was it? A digital copy, partially redacted, of the palace's internal review of Meghan Markle's public claims. And here's the twist. This wasn't some salacious vendetta compiled after the Oprah interview. According to Bower, the report had already been in motion months before Meghan and Harry even sat down with the Duchess of Drama herself. Why? Because cracks had already started to show. Staff resignations, inconsistencies in Meghan's public statements, emails that didn't match timelines, phone calls that contradicted press briefings, and, crucially, complaints. Not just about workload or misunderstandings, but about behavior, alleged bullying, emotional coercion, a culture of weaponized victimhood, as one anonymous aide described it. The palace, terrified of triggering a race scandal or appearing cold-hearted, did what it always does. It contained the fallout quietly. But behind the scenes, senior courtiers were building a defensive archive. And when the Oprah bombshell dropped, and global headlines labeled the monarchy an out-of-touch, racist relic, the quiet review turned into a full-scale operation. Tom Bower's smoking gun. So how did Bower get it? He won't say. Not publicly. But sources close to the situation suggest the leak came not from a disgruntled aide, but from someone at the Privy Council level. Someone who believed that truth, even ugly truth, was essential to the crown's survival in the modern world. They didn't want revenge. They wanted transparency. And if the monarchy refused to defend itself publicly, then maybe the court of public opinion could do what the palace wouldn't. So Bower was handed the file. And it didn't take long before he knew he had something nuclear. A bombshell in the index. The report was long. 113 pages. Every page packed with time-stamped events, claims, and rebuttals. Think of it as a war room's master timeline. Every appearance, every quote, every media moment Meghan had crafted since 2017, and the palace's silent fact-checking of each. Let's walk through what he found in just the first 30 pages. Section 1. The baby shower affair. Discrepancy between who funded Meghan's New York baby shower and what she told senior aides. The event's costs, the guest list, and press involvement are all flagged as strategically misrepresented. Section 2. The Kate incident. A full communications breakdown showing how Meghan flipped the crying incident during wedding preparations. Internal emails show her admitting Kate had apologized, contradicting the narrative presented in the Oprah interview. Section 3. The royal tour edits. Allegations that footage from their Australia tour was edited and presented in ways that implied racism or rudeness from staff, despite unedited tapes showing the opposite. But it was Section 4 that reportedly made Bower's jaw drop. Section 4. The Queen's last conversation. According to Meghan, her final conversations with Queen Elizabeth II were warm, supportive, and gracious. But Bower's report says something else. It includes a log entry written by a senior aide present during the call, which claims Meghan interrupted the Queen 3 times, made passive-aggressive demands regarding the christening location for Archie, and insisted on a pre-approved media strategy, mid-conversation. The log ends with a brutal footnote. Her Majesty was visibly distressed after the call. She later referred to it privately as a performance, not a goodbye. Now pause. Let that sink in. Because that one line may explain why Queen Elizabeth withdrew from public commentary on Meghan and Harry entirely in her final year. And it also sets the tone for what the rest of the report reveals, a pattern of manipulated narratives, carefully staged for press impact, often at the cost of internal truth. The forensics of falsehood. So how did the palace even compile this? Simple. They turned to digital forensics. cross-matching emails and iMessage screenshots obtained from consenting staff members, comparing media claims to security logs, such as entry/exit times from palaces and motorcades, scrutinizing timestamps on social media uploads and comparing them to real-world events, and, chillingly, matching Meghan's televised claims with metadata from her own PR team's briefing memos. That's right. Some of Meghan's interviews were scripted with talking points pre-approved by her media strategists, according to leaked docs. And those talking points directly contradict what the palace had on record. In other words, this wasn't just spin. It was orchestration. Who knew what and when? Another damning revelation in the report? That several senior royals warned King Charles early on that Meghan was building a parallel narrative. These warnings came from Princess and William and Catherine's communications team, multiple senior aides from Clarence House and Kensington Palace. One memo to Charles reads, "There is an emerging pattern of misrepresentation from the Sussex household. We advise proactive containment before narratives ossify in public consciousness." Translation: get ahead of the lies before they become the truth. But Charles, ever the father, reportedly refused. He hoped it would die down. That, perhaps, it was a misunderstanding or youthful impetuousness. Instead, it metastasized. The cost of silence. The palace's decision to never complain, never explain, backfired dramatically. By refusing to address even blatant misstatements in real time, they allowed Meghan's narrative to take root globally. The result? Millions believed the monarchy was cruel, that it ignored suicidal pleas, that it snubbed a biracial duchess, that it allowed bullying and racism to thrive. Even as Bowers' report points to clear instances where Meghan was offered professional mental health support and declined it. Staffers of color were promoted under her tenure. Private apologies were issued and ignored. One source calls it the greatest PR cell phone in royal history. And now, they want it back. But it may be too late. And yet, one sentence changed everything. There's one sentence buried deep in the file that Bowers says chilled him more than any other. It's from an email Meghan allegedly sent her U.S. publicist during the Netflix documentary negotiations. In it, she refers to the palace's fear of confrontation and says, "They're too polite to fight back. That's why we'll win." That's the moment, according to Bauer, when it stopped being about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. It became strategic, weaponized, calculated. So what now? Now, the crown is at a crossroads. With January 1st approaching, this report may become the foundation for a formal stripping of royal titles. But there's a risk. Going public could trigger a transatlantic PR war, one that pits constitutional truth against celebrity influence. And Meghan isn't going down without a fight, because she's heard about the leak too. And her team is already planning a counteroffensive, one that could include legal threats, American talk show appearances, and coordinated media spin. But here's the problem. The next section of Bowers' report, it doesn't just expose Meghan. It suggests she may have intentionally manipulated the Queen's death for narrative purposes, and the evidence is jaw-dropping. But that comes next. And no one, not even the palace, is ready for what's inside. What if the first sign of a calculated deception wasn't during an interview, but during a party? What if the one event that painted Meghan Markle as a glowing, celebrated mother-to-be, surrounded by celebrity friends and luxury gift bags, was never really about celebrating a baby at all? Because according to the palace report now in Tom Bowers' hands, Meghan's 2019 New York baby shower wasn't just controversial, it was weaponized. Not just against royal protocol, but against the royal family itself. And the most shocking part? They knew it at the time. They just couldn't prove it. Until now. The party that sparked a crisis. It was February 2019. The press had just begun to turn on Meghan. Whispers of diva behavior. Rumors of staff quitting. Reports of tension with Kate Middleton. But then came the photos. Meghan stepping out of the Mark Hotel in Manhattan, wearing designer sunglasses, smiling for the paps, clutching gifts. Escorted by security with celebrity friends in tow, Serena Williams, Amal Clooney, Gayle King. On the surface, it looked like a glamorous, private event thrown by friends to celebrate the upcoming birth of baby Archie. But behind palace walls, alarms were already ringing. Why? Because nothing about that event had been cleared, not by royal protocol advisors, not by senior staff, and certainly not by the Queen's office. "It caught us completely off guard," said one former aide quoted in Bauer's notes. "There were no formal briefings, no security requests in advance, no cooperation with UK protection teams. We were watching it unfold live on TMZ. And that was just the beginning." The funding question. The first major red flag? Money. Meghan later insisted the event was privately funded by friends. But the palace report tells a very different story. Let's break it down. The suite at the Mark Hotel reportedly cost $75,000 per night. Booked under an LLC linked to a New York-based PR agency tied to Meghan's early Hollywood network. Catering, floral arrangements, decor, and spa treatments were allegedly coordinated not by Serena or Amal, but by a hired luxury events firm with known ties to Meghan's former business manager. A private jet was used for transport back to the UK. Meghan's team claimed it was gifted, but flight records traced by palace aides revealed a payment from a shell company connected to Meghan's North America team. Even more damning, one of the luxury vendors submitted an invoice directly addressed to HRH, the Duchess of Sussex, Buckingham Palace. A detail Bauer suggests shows royal titles were used to secure commercial perks. This wasn't a few friends grabbing cupcakes and laughing over baby names. It was a strategically curated media event worth upwards of $500,000 that appeared, in every visible way, to violate royal guidelines around personal enrichment and publicity. And worse, it worked. Because for weeks afterward, the global press fawned over Meghan's star-studded support system, just as questions were beginning to mount about her behavior inside the palace. Optics versus reality. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation isn't about money. It's about what was said and done behind the scenes. According to the palace report, a staff member on Meghan's team flagged concerns 1 week before the shower that the event would send mixed messages and may trigger reputational backlash. Meghan allegedly replied, via internal message, with this line: "We're not going to wait around for the firm to protect the narrative. This is our moment." That phrase, "protect the narrative," has since become a kind of smoking gun among palace insiders. Because it reframes the entire event. It wasn't about joy, or motherhood, or bonding with girlfriends. It was about control. Control of the story. Control of the optics. Control of the public sympathy Meghan feared she was losing. And by staging it in New York, far from palace protocols, far from royal oversight, she ensured no one could stop her. The hidden cameras theory. Here's where it gets even darker. One source referenced in the report claims that portions of the baby shower were professionally filmed by a US-based documentary crew under the guise of private archival footage. Let that sink in. There are now credible suggestions, supported by signed vendor NDAs and event permits, that Meghan may have intended to use the shower footage in a future documentary project. Possibly Netflix. Possibly something else. Tom Bauer describes it this way. This wasn't just a breach of etiquette. It was the first real proof that Meghan viewed her royal life not as duty, but as content. And if that's true, then the New York baby shower wasn't just a media moment. It was a pilot episode. The palace reacts. Too late. What did the palace do in response? Almost nothing. Charles was said to be deeply disappointed. William reportedly called it humiliating. The Queen was briefed on the optics, but was advised to remain neutral. And Meghan? She doubled down. In private messages included in the report, she reportedly mocked the backlash as jealous noise and instructed her team to ride the wave of positive press. She even reportedly referred to one aide's attempt to caution her as old-world noise. But the fallout was real. Public opinion in the UK dipped. The tabloids, previously enamored, turned hostile. Staff morale inside the Sussex office collapsed. 3 aides would resign within 6 weeks. But Meghan didn't seem fazed. Because she had a different audience now, one that didn't care about protocol or duty. She had America, and she had Oprah. The Meghan brand is born. It's no coincidence that just 1 year later, Meghan and Harry would formalize their departure from royal duties. The baby shower had shown her something no royal briefing could. Independent media control was more powerful than any palace press office. The shower was a test run, and a wildly successful one. It proved she could dominate the news cycle without palace approval, without official endorsement, and without consequence. That realization, detailed in a voice memo Meghan allegedly sent to a U.S. business advisor, shaped the next 3 years of strategic moves. The Netflix deal, the Spotify podcast, the Oprah interview, the Archwell Foundation rebrand. And yet, none of it would have worked if the baby shower hadn't succeeded. One lie, many consequences. Now, imagine you're the palace. You let this one go. You didn't push back when they said it was just friends celebrating. You ignored the shady payments. You let her use the HRH title on invoices. And now, you're staring at a 100-page report showing that the very event you dismissed as harmless fun was the launchpad for a sustained, global narrative war, one that painted the royal family as cruel, cold, and bigoted. It's no wonder Charles finally snapped, because it wasn't just about the baby shower. It was about the principle, about honor, about whether the monarchy would continue to let itself be used as a backdrop for someone else's carefully crafted fairy tale. But the baby shower wasn't the worst revelation in the report. Not even close. Because next, we dive into the lie that touched the Queen herself. The moment Meghan claimed Her Majesty had embraced her as a daughter, a moment that pulled on heartstrings across the world. But according to the palace's private diaries, that moment never happened. And the truth? It's heartbreaking. What if the most touching moment in Meghan Markle's royal narrative, the moment that made millions around the world see her as a cherished, welcome daughter-in-law, never actually happened? What if the emotional scene she described was a script? And what if the Queen, the woman Meghan claimed wrapped her in warmth and compassion, actually walked away from their final call feeling shaken, manipulated, and deeply troubled? Because according to the palace's internal report, the one Tom Bower now holds, Meghan's most sympathetic story about the Queen wasn't just exaggerated. It was fabricated. And this is where the narrative begins to fracture in the most devastating way. Let's dive in. The mini hook. It never happened. Those were the words that reportedly appeared in the palace log. 3 words. Cold. Clinical. Final. It never happened. This was the verdict from the Queen's senior aide after cross-checking Meghan's Oprah claims against royal diaries, call sheets, and security logs. But what exactly did Meghan say? In the Oprah interview, Meghan told a heartfelt story about sharing an emotional moment with Queen Elizabeth II, during which the Queen supposedly comforted her, showed maternal affection, and offered wisdom during Meghan's darkest moment inside the royal family. It was moving, relatable, humanizing. Millions believed it. And why wouldn't they? Who'd lie about a dying monarch? But here is where Tom Bower's report says the narrative collapses. Not only does the palace insist that such a moment didn't happen, they say it couldn't have happened. Because the meeting Meghan described, the call she referenced, the setting she claimed, all verifiably impossible. The timeline that destroys it all. Let's reconstruct the scene exactly as the palace report does. Clinically, ruthlessly, and with timestamps that don't lie. According to Meghan, the Queen comforted her before she and Harry made their official transition announcements. They had a private moment discussing Meghan's emotional struggles. The Queen allegedly expressed regret that Meghan hadn't been supported better. They even shared a supposedly touching conversation about royal protocol and personal sacrifice. But according to palace logs, the Queen wasn't even in the same country on the date Meghan referenced. She wasn't even within reachable distance of Meghan for an in-person, intimate conversation. And the alleged phone call, it wasn't on the Queen's schedule. It wasn't in her call logs. And it wasn't authorized through the communications office. So how could the Queen have said any of the things Meghan attributed to her? Simple. She didn't. The real call, a very different story. According to Tom Bower's source, there was a call between Meghan and the Queen, but it was nothing like the story told on Oprah. Let's walk through what the palace report claims actually occurred. It was a routine check-in, scheduled at Meghan's request, primarily to discuss Archie's christening plans, the Sussex's upcoming travel requests, and Meghan's concerns about press coverage. Not exactly the grandmotherly heart-to-heart Meghan painted, but it gets worse. According to the aide present, the Queen attempted to discuss royal duties and expectations, but Meghan repeatedly interrupted, steering the conversation back to her frustrations, grievances, and media image. At one point, Meghan allegedly pushed for a commitment that the palace would issue a public statement defending her from tabloid criticism. The Queen, careful, measured, declined. She emphasized the necessity of following established procedures. Meghan, according to the log, reacted with visible frustration, sharper tone, a reference to being silenced. This is the opposite of the Tinder scene she later described. And then came the moment that broke the Queen's composure. The performance line. This detail is one of the most haunting in the entire report. Immediately after the call, the Queen reportedly told her senior aide, "That was not a goodbye. It was a performance." Think about that. The Queen, a woman known for her grace, restraint, and steel control, rarely, if ever, made emotional assessments of family members. But this call shook her, not because Meghan was distressed, but because something felt off. Scripted, manipulative, calculated for emotional effect. It wasn't the voice of a granddaughter-in-law seeking help. It was the tone of someone positioning herself for a narrative. Why would Meghan fabricate this? Here's the part that Tom Bower explores in depth. Why would Meghan create an emotional scene involving the Queen? Why risk being contradicted? The report suggests three possible motivations, all chilling in their own way. 1. Emotional leverage. A Tinder moment with the Queen paints Meghan not as a rebel or critic, but as someone blessed, validated, and embraced by the monarch herself. That makes any future criticism of the institution more powerful. Why would Meghan attack the monarchy if even the Queen loved her? See how that works? 2. Narrative ownership. If the Queen supported her in private, Meghan becomes the sympathetic protagonist, the misunderstood outsider fighting an outdated institution. Perfect for Hollywood. Perfect for Oprah. Perfect for the memoir. 3. Immunity from criticism. By invoking the Queen's compassion, Meghan indirectly shielded herself from public scrutiny. After all, if the Queen favored her, who were we to doubt her? This wasn't storytelling. It was strategic emotional currency. But then comes the darkest twist. Remember the cliffhanger from last chapter? The part about the Queen's death possibly being manipulated for narrative purposes? Here's where the threads begin to intertwine. After the Queen passed away, Meghan told media insiders that her relationship with the Queen had always been deep, personal, and full of warmth. But the palace report includes multiple diary entries from senior aides indicating that Meghan seldom visited the Queen privately. The Queen expressed concern about Meghan's agenda. Harry privately apologized to the Queen for Meghan's behavior. Meghan attempted to control messaging around the Queen's health. And then there is the claim, buried deep in the report, that Meghan's team prepared a pre-written media tribute to the Queen months before her death, designed to frame Meghan's time in the royal family as uniquely meaningful. Think about that. A tribute written in Meghan's voice, painting a bond the Queen herself apparently felt was artificially constructed. A bond that was never reciprocal. A bond that was convenient for brand positioning, but non-existent in private reality. The emotional fallout. Here's the real tragedy. Despite the pain, the Queen wanted reconciliation. That's the heartbreaking part the report makes clear. She wanted calm, unity, family peace. But she also wanted truth. And she wasn't getting it. One entry, dated months before her death, quotes the Queen saying, "I don't recognize this story. It is not the truth." Those were her words. Quiet, sad, firm. This wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The kind only a grandmother and a monarch could feel. Why this matters now? We're not just talking about a lie. We're talking about a narrative that fooled millions and shaped global perception of the monarchy. We're talking about a moment weaponized against an institution whose leader couldn't defend herself publicly. A moment that became a foundation for the Oprah interview, Netflix series, and public sympathy wave. A moment that formed part of the justification for stepping back, moving to America, launching media contracts, attacking the institution. A moment that may have helped Meghan secure her image and her deals. And now, it's collapsing. Because the next section of Bower's report doesn't just expose inconsistencies. It documents intent. Documents showing Meghan rehearsed certain stories, practiced lines, drafted versions. And in one email, she reportedly wrote, "This is the only way they'll understand me." But the next chapter proves something stunning. Meghan didn't just fabricate a conversation about the Queen. She allegedly reversed the truth about Kate Middleton and turned herself into the victim of a moment that palace diaries claim she initiated. What comes next is explosive, and nobody saw it coming. What if the tear-stained royal moment that catapulted Meghan Markle into public sympathy, the infamous "Kate made me cry" line, was never about tears of pain, but about strategic deception? What if the story was rehearsed? What if the victim was never Meghan? And what if the palace, silent for years, finally has the receipts to flip the narrative upside down? Because according to the report obtained by Tom Bower, Dressgate wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a calculated reversal. And Kate Middleton? She was the real casualty. The mini-hook, the rehearsal memo. Let's start with this. The Palace report contains a phrase that has rocked insiders. It appears in an aide's email, dated just 1 week before the Oprah interview was taped. It reads, would like to rehearse the bridesmaid anecdote again, this time with softer pacing, and focus on tears. Wait, again? Rehearse? That's not how personal trauma is usually conveyed. That's how storyboards are written. And yet, here we are, with documented internal notes showing Meghan Markle workshopping her version of the Dressgate moment just days before the most-watched royal interview in modern history. Let's break it down. The story that made headlines around the world. We all remember what Meghan said. In the Oprah interview, she was asked about reports that she had made Kate Middleton cry during wedding preparations. Her response? No. The reverse happened. She then painted a scene in which Kate made her cry, and that she forgave her, even though the palace never corrected the false narrative in the press. It was delivered with composure, emotion, humility. Millions sympathized. Headlines exploded with support. The angry white duchess versus the graceful black duchess story took hold. Twitter went into meltdown. Kate was lambasted as cold, emotionally tone-deaf, even racist adjacent. But what if none of that was true? Because Tom Bower's access to internal palace documents, and, more crucially, staff testimonies, tells a chillingly different story. What really happened in the bridesmaid fitting? The now infamous incident occurred during a fitting for Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress, just days before Harry and Meghan's wedding in May 2018. According to Meghan, Kate was upset about something minor, tights or fit, and it escalated into a confrontation that left Meghan in tears. But here's what Bower's sources reveal. Multiple staffers were present at the fitting. Kate did not raise her voice. She reportedly suggested Charlotte's dress be adjusted by the seamstress to avoid discomfort. Meghan allegedly responded with sharpness and sarcasm, insisting it was fine and dismissing Kate's concern. The conversation grew tense, with Meghan reportedly walking out. But the real twist? One of the stylists, later interviewed privately during the palace's internal review, said this. It wasn't Kate who left the room visibly upset. It was Catherine who apologized, even though she had done nothing wrong. The report includes notes from a phone call made by Kate to Meghan that evening, in which Kate is quoted as saying, "I'm sorry if I upset you. That wasn't my intention." And Meghan's response? Short, dismissive. It's fine. But that's not what she told Oprah. She told the world that Kate had made her cry. And the palace allowed the press to believe it had been her fault. Except now we know the palace knew better. They just didn't speak. Until now. Why didn't the palace push back? It's one of the great frustrations for royalists. Why didn't they clarify? Why didn't they correct the narrative? According to the report, there was a debate. Charles was reportedly alarmed that Kate's name was being dragged. William was furious. Palace press officers drafted a quiet correction. But Queen Elizabeth reportedly advised against it. Let silence protect dignity, she allegedly said. It was a choice that would backfire. Because while the palace stayed silent, the Oprah narrative took root. Kate became a symbol of white coldness. Meghan became the misunderstood outsider. And the world's media went to war over an event that, in truth, should never have been public at all. The emotional toll on Kate Middleton. Here's where the story becomes painful. According to Bower, the fallout from Meghan's retelling of the incident deeply affected Catherine. She reportedly wept in private after the Oprah interview aired. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and confused, as one friend reportedly told Bower. She had believed, perhaps naively, that the apology ended the matter. But instead, she became a tool in a larger narrative machine. The report quotes a senior palace aide. Kate took the hit. She endured global criticism, and she never fought back. And yet, within days of the Oprah interview airing, new drafts of Meghan's Netflix deal began circulating, specifically featuring royal conflict as a narrative axis. Coincidence? Or part of a pattern? The Netflix rehearsals, a smoking gun. Here's where it gets even murkier. Tom Bower claims that within the Palace report are transcripts of conversations between Meghan's team and a documentary producer, weeks before the Oprah interview. In one email, a producer writes, "Would be great to get more clarity around the Kate story. Feels like a strong emotional beat if handled delicately." And Meghan's team allegedly responds, "She's open to revisiting it, maybe more personal this time. Fewer factual details, more on how it felt." Let's pause here. Fewer facts, more feelings. That's not truth. That's storytelling. And that line may prove pivotal in justifying the palace's rumored decision to strip titles. Because if you use your title to rewrite reality for dramatic effect and profit, you're no longer just telling your story. You're weaponizing other people's reputations. And the palace? They've had enough. Harry's silent role in the lie. Where was Harry in all of this? Did he believe Meghan's version? Or did he know? According to the report, Harry initially accepted Meghan's framing of the event, but expressed private doubts after the Oprah interview aired. Bower includes notes from a palace contact who claims Harry admitted, "I think she exaggerated it." And yet, he didn't correct it. Because by then, it was too late. The machine was rolling. The Netflix cameras were circling. The book deal was inked. The sympathy was flowing. And Harry? He went along. Silence became complicity. And Catherine? She was collateral damage. The real cost of Dressgate. Let's zoom out for a second. This wasn't just a spat between in-laws. This was a narrative inflection point. The moment the world decided Meghan was wronged and the royals were the oppressors. And it wasn't based on truth. It was based on rehearsed emotion, revised memory, and strategic silence. Kate's dignity cost her global reputation. Meghan's tears earned her media deals. And the palace, now holding a report that proves the entire scene was staged, is preparing to strike back. Because if Meghan could rewrite something so small and so personal, what else has she edited? What else has she flipped? And what comes next? According to Bower, the answer is chilling. Because the next section of the report, never before leaked, includes details about a private letter from King Charles, sent in good faith and twisted in public. A letter that was never supposed to be seen again, until Meghan used it for her narrative. And when Charles found out, he was furious. What happens when a private letter, written by a father to his struggling son and daughter-in-law, becomes a media weapon? What happens when compassion is exploited? And what happens when the man who wrote that letter realizes it's been used against him, in front of the entire world? According to the secret palace report obtained by Tom Bower, King Charles's handwritten letter to Meghan Markle was never meant to be public. It was intimate. It was thoughtful. And it was written at one of the most fragile moments in the royal family's modern history. But Meghan used it. Not just once. Not just for clarity. But repeatedly, in interviews, behind the scenes, and, allegedly, in confidential negotiations with media partners. And now, Charles feels betrayed. This chapter isn't about misunderstandings or differences in communication style. This is about manipulation. About taking a man's private words, a father's words, and repackaging them into a tool of public humiliation. Let's unpack how it happened, and why this may have been the final straw for King Charles. The letter that wasn't supposed to exist. We begin in early 2020, just weeks after Harry and Meghan announced their intention to step back as working royals. Charles sent a personal letter to Meghan. It was, by all accounts, not a formality. It wasn't typed. It wasn't drafted by aides. It was handwritten. In his own script, with ink and embossed stationery. The tone? Respectful, hopeful, empathetic, but firm. According to excerpts quoted in the palace report, Charles expressed sadness at the unfolding family rift, acknowledged Meghan's discomfort with royal constraints, reiterated his commitment to her and Harry's well-being, emphasized his loyalty to the institution, and asked for her understanding. But then came the critical paragraph, the one Bower says was weaponized. In navigating this next chapter, I ask only that we protect the dignity of our family and the integrity of the crown. That sentence, meant as a heartfelt plea, would later be selectively quoted and allegedly distorted. How Meghan used the letter. Fast forward to late 2021. In an interview with a friendly American magazine, unnamed in the report but believed to be part of a profile pitch, Meghan made an emotional reference to Charles's letter. She said she had received a letter from a senior royal, which acknowledged her pain and recognized the way she'd been treated. Those were her words. They sounded powerful, vindicating, even remorseful, and media outlets around the world picked it up. But Charles, upon hearing of the quote, was baffled, because nowhere in his letter did he suggest she'd been mistreated, and nowhere did he apologize. The palace launched an internal inquiry. They reread the letter. They compared Meghan's statements against the original text, and they concluded the letter had been twisted surgically to suggest a message it did not contain. But why would Meghan do this? According to Bauer, the answer is as disturbing as it is strategic. The proof of persecution strategy. Bauer's source, a senior comms aide with ties to both Clarence House and Kensington Palace, describes what they call Meghan's narrative layering strategy. It works like this. Create a story of pain or conflict. Reference a private royal response, letter, call, meeting. Imbue that response with emotional validation, real or imagined. Use that moment as proof that the palace knew something was wrong and did nothing. It's clever, because the royal family, bound by silence, cannot challenge or confirm private correspondence. So Meghan could speak freely about the letter, knowing full well Charles would never publish it. She controlled the narrative. She controlled the tone, and by referencing the senior royal as vague but understanding, she shifted public sentiment without showing a shred of the actual evidence. But now that the letter is documented in the palace report and in Bauer's possession, the manipulation is clear, and it goes even deeper. The clever edit technique. Within the report is a side-by-side comparison of Charles's original phrasing and the way Meghan allegedly paraphrased it in private meetings with media producers. Original, Charles's handwriting. In navigating this next chapter, I ask only that we protect the dignity of our family and the integrity of the crown. Meghan's retelling to a U.S. streaming executive per a leaked meeting summary. Charles asked me to help protect the dignity of the crown. That's how much he knew it was under pressure. Subtle, but critical. She changed the context. She flipped the intention, turning a call for discretion into an admission of institutional vulnerability. Now imagine that quote embedded in a documentary pitch deck, or whispered to a New York Times journalist, or alluded to in a podcast series on power and patriarchy. That's how the game is played. Charles's reaction, the breaking point. The king's reported reaction? Stunned. According to the palace file, Charles was briefed by his private secretary the moment Meghan's letter reference hit the media. He asked for the original letter. He read it again, silently. Then he reportedly said, "She turned my olive branch into a weapon." And that line, it became the title of a secret briefing document shared with the king's legal team, a document now referenced in Bauer's report. It was at this moment, insiders say, that Charles began seriously considering the removal of titles. Because this wasn't just about Harry and Meghan stepping back. This was about trust, privacy, and betrayal. A private letter, written in good faith, had been used to undermine him. Legal implications, letters, libel, and leaks. The palace consulted legal experts. Could they challenge Meghan's references to the letter? Could they deny her quotes? Could they ask for a public correction? The answer? No. Why? Because Meghan never directly published the letter. She paraphrased. She hinted. She remembered aloud. Legally unprovable, but morally unforgivable. And that's when the palace decided they wouldn't win this war with PR. They'd win it with action. Why this matters for title removal? You may be wondering, why does this letter matter so much? Because it's pattern evidence. It shows a deliberate tendency to reinterpret private royal exchanges to serve a media narrative. It proves, in the palace's view, that Meghan doesn't just share her truth. She reshapes others' truths. And if you're still using the Duchess title while doing so, you're undermining the very crown that granted it. And that, in the eyes of the palace, is unacceptable. What comes next? The report doesn't end here. Because the letter incident triggered a quiet review of every private royal exchange Meghan had publicly referenced. Phone calls, meetings, texts, and what they found. Chilling patterns. And one particularly damning incident involving the late Queen that, if proven, could become the final nail in the coffin. But before that, there was Archetypes, the podcast that pretended to be about feminism. But, according to the palace's secret report, was about revenge. And the words Meghan used? Some of them weren't hers. And some were taken directly from palace staff without consent. What comes next is the untold story of Archetypes and the secret messaging hidden inside it. What if the podcast that promised empowerment was, behind the scenes, a declaration of war? What if every carefully chosen word, every story, every guest, wasn't just curated for content, but designed as a strategic assault? And what if the palace has proof? Because according to the internal royal report reviewed by Tom Bower, Archetypes wasn't just a podcast. It was a coded communication campaign, a slow-drip, soft-voiced weapon of revenge. Veiled in feminism, wrapped in empowerment, but saturated with score settling. And now the palace has compiled a stunning breakdown, tracking the names, words, references, and themes in Meghan Markle's Spotify podcast and tying them to real-world palace grievances, many of which had never before been made public. This is the chapter where a soft-spoken audio show becomes a smoking gun. Let's unpack it. Mini hook. They won't get it, but they'll feel it. That's the line Bower says appears in a production memo from one of Meghan's podcast producers, dated 2 weeks before the show's first episode dropped. It was a quote allegedly attributed to Meghan herself during a creative meeting. They won't get it, but they'll feel it. At the time, it was brushed off. Now the palace sees it as a confession, a declaration of intent to layer double meaning, emotional callbacks, and symbolic jabs into her content. Not just to tell her story, but to subtly wound those who crossed her. The podcast that looked harmless, until it wasn't. On the surface, Archetypes was a progressive triumph. Meghan interviewing high-profile women, discussing gender norms, exploring labels like diva, bossy, ambitious. It had celebrity guests, intimate conversations, slick production. But according to the palace report, Archetypes wasn't random. It followed a pattern. And the pattern wasn't editorial. It was personal. Each episode, they argue, aligned with specific grievances Meghan had with the royal family, masked behind themes that sounded benign. Let's examine them. Episode 1. The Misconception of Ambition. Meghan opens by discussing how ambition in women is viewed negatively, especially once they succeed. She mentions how things changed when she married into the royal family. Apparently, ambition is a terrible thing, for a woman, that is, according to some. But here's what the palace knew. Meghan had clashed with palace staff over branding ideas, launch timelines, and media visibility. Multiple aides described her as intensely ambitious, not in a negative sense, but in a way that clashed with royal tradition. One aide said, "She treated the royal family like a platform. We treat it like a duty." This episode wasn't abstract. It was coded commentary on her royal handlers. Episode 2. The Diva, featuring Mariah Carey. One quote from Mariah Carey stood out. "You give us diva moments, Meghan." To which Meghan later responded, on air, that she sweated over the remark because of what it signified. According to Bower, this episode was crafted to address the Duchess' difficult narrative that had taken over the UK press after multiple staff members quit. Here's what the palace report highlights. Internal emails from Meghan's team showing concern about staff turnover PR optics. A pre-interview memo suggesting Meghan flip the diva narrative and own it through cultural context. The result? A story that reframed criticism of her conduct as racism or misogyny. And the palace? They couldn't say a word. Episode 4. The Demystification of Dragon Lady, featuring Margaret Cho. This episode targeted the stereotype of the Dragon Lady, often used to describe Asian women. But listen closely to Meghan's words, and you hear something else. When you see me, do you see someone who is too strong, too polished, too direct, too much? Now pause. Compare that to a complaint cited in the palace report. A senior aide described Meghan's tone in meetings as performative, like she was trying to control a room, not collaborate. The report includes transcripts from meetings where Meghan allegedly told royal press officers, "This isn't a monarchy. This is modern media, and I am the brand." So when she says too strong, too polished, too much, she's not just talking about stereotypes. She's talking about how the palace saw her. It's veiled. It's indirect. But for those inside, it was deafening. The staff testimonies. It was about us. Perhaps the most damning part of Bauer's report? The internal testimony from former staff members who listened to archetypes and recognized themselves. One press officer described feeling attacked by an anecdote in episode 6, which mirrored a real staff confrontation almost word for word. A scheduling aide noticed Meghan referencing tight control on calendar space, which directly tied to a meeting in 2019 about her overbooking herself during royal tours. A protocol liaison noted a remark about being told how to sit, smile, and speak, a direct echo of a training document provided to all new royals, not just Meghan. None of these references were named. But inside the palace, they knew exactly what she was doing. One aide reportedly said, "It felt like being scolded by a podcast. And we couldn't answer back." The Spotify fallout, a clue in plain sight. After Archetypes was canceled by Spotify, amid claims Meghan didn't meet expectations, her team pushed back publicly. But internally, they knew why. Bauer's sources claim Spotify quietly flagged Archetypes for low engagement versus production cost. And more controversially, for episodes being overly thematic with limited guest interaction. Translation? It felt like a monologue, not a conversation. And that's the point. The podcast wasn't built for Meghan to explore ideas. It was built for Meghan to air grievances, safely, cryptically, and unchallenged. The final straw, the invisible prison segment. In one episode, Meghan references the concept of the invisible prison women are placed in, citing rules, expectations, and surveillance. But the palace was furious. Why? Because they say the metaphor perfectly mirrors private complaints Meghan made about living at Frogmore Cottage, complaints not known to the public until that episode aired. Inside Bauer's file is a quote from an anonymous palace aide. "We always feared she'd tell our story. We never thought she'd do it in riddles." The episode even includes a reference to not being able to open windows freely, which insiders claim was a direct callback to a safety-related restriction Meghan resented during her time at Windsor. Think about that. A podcast guest hears it as poetic metaphor. The palace hears it as a jab. This was calculated. The bigger picture, why it all matters. Here's the core issue. The royal family values discretion. Archetypes blurred that line deliberately. It wasn't just a personal project. It was a reconstruction of events, a repackaging of grievances, and a soft power weapon deployed globally, wrapped in the language of liberation. And the palace? They can't win against metaphors. They can't sue a feeling. But now that Tom Bauer has linked these coded references back to specific palace moments, the story changes. Because it proves intent. It proves Meghan knew what she was doing. She wasn't just sharing her journey. She was reshaping the crown, one episode at a time. And the final proof? She allegedly included lines lifted verbatim from internal palace documents. Documents never cleared for public use. Documents that were supposed to remain confidential. And when that discovery was made, the palace had no choice. The titles would have to go. But before the decision could be finalized, something unexpected happened. A secret message was sent to Harry, and the palace has the transcript. What if the very series that was supposed to set the record straight became the clearest record of manipulation? What if the royal family, silenced, restrained, and constitutionally shackled, had been quietly tracking the lies from episode 1? And what if the palace now has the receipts? According to Tom Bauer, the most damning portion of the internal royal report is not about archetypes. It's not about press statements, baby showers, or even Meghan's infamous "Kate made me cry" reversal. It's about the Netflix docuseries, the 6-part glossy, high-budget global event titled Harry and Meghan. Because what millions thought was an intimate love story with tragic undertones was, in the eyes of the palace, a carefully structured propaganda campaign. And now, for the first time, the rebuttals are being documented, one by one.